Hello everyone, welcome back. My name is Dominic, and today we're talking about part 2 of our character rigging tutorial. In part 1, we talked about how to create the skeleton, the joint skeleton of our character. And as you can see, we went through creating these joints, having these joints parented into one skeletal system, so that ways we can move our skeleton in a very similar way that we expect to move our character. So that's where if you be sure to go back and check on that or get a refresher if you need to. But today we're going to talk about how to get this skeleton to actually be bound to our character, because as it is right now, it does not move the character if we move the skeleton itself. And we're also going to talk about how to set up controls so that ways we can very easily pose our character into different poses for animation. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Now, as I mentioned before, this skeleton needs to be bound to our character because it's not actually moving the character the way that we want it to. So in order to do that, it's a very simple process. We're going to first select our skeleton like I have it right here, outlined in green. I'm going to hold Shift and select my character mesh. Notice that this is just one 3D object. So if you have multiples, make sure that you combine them. And then I'm going to go up here to this drop-down menu called Skin, and I'm going to click on Bind Skin, the first one down. Now, nothing really changes in your viewport. However, if I deselect the skeleton, you'll notice that it is now a bunch of different colors, and this shows me that, okay, our mesh is now properly bound to this skin. Furthermore, if I grab the mesh itself, the skeleton itself, and move it, you'll see that the character also moves along with it. So that is perfect. That's fantastic. It's exactly what I want. Of course, we can't animate with this yet because, well, it's so hard to actually grab these joints. We don't want that to be part of our workflow. So what we need are controllers or external shapes bound to each of these joints that we expect to move to do all of the animating for us, or to be the controller in which we use to animate. So in order to create these controllers, let me first go ahead and hide the mesh. We don't need to see that anymore. I'm going to go to my Curves and Surfaces shelf and create a very simple shape. Now this shape doesn't have to be a circle. I'm using a circle for the sake of speed and time saving for this tutorial. However, you can also use the pen tool and create unique shapes if you'd like to. And you'll see that preferred on a bunch of different rigs. But for today's tutorial, it's all going to be circles, which might make it a little bit confusing to tell which one is which, and we're going to talk about that later on. So I've got a circle right here. It's just this very first icon over here. And basically what I want is I want a circle to accompany every joint on my skeleton, so that way I can be able to grab that individual joint via the circle shape and move it from there. So I'm going to need a couple of more. In order for me to kind of put this on these particular joints, I'm going to turn on the Snap to Points tool, which is in our Snap to icons up here. And with that selected, it's going to be in blue. And now if I hold this center of the gumball, you'll notice that it wants to latch onto each of these controllers, which is perfect. That's exactly what I want to do. So I'm going to hold Shift and create essentially one shape per joint that I want this character to be moved independently from. So I've got a hip joint right here. I'm going to put a couple of, I'm going to skip this one right here because technically that in our rib cage is a sturdy solid structure, so that doesn't actually bend and deform. I just want some along these portions right here, which is the small of the back. That's where you'll see if characters have to bend over, that's where they'll be bending. And finally, let's work our way out, and I'm just holding Shift and cloning these guys. I'm going to orient these to be a little bit more directionally accurate later on, but let's just get enough placeholders there. So as you can see, it looks very confusing because they're all the same size, the same scale, and the same rotation. So what I think I'm going to do is rotate these guys roughly 90 degrees. And let's shrink this and maybe squish these down to some oval shapes. And with my character unhidden, I'm just going to make sure that these guys are big enough that I'll be able to grab them. So make this guy a little bit bigger, maybe a little bit taller. There we go. So now it's sticking out. This ankle, let's make it a little bit smaller so it's not too obtrusive. Let's make this knee a little bit bigger. I'm going to, let's hide this character again. Take this leg portion, rotate it, make it a little bit bigger. I want this hip joint to be nice and big. If you remember or recall from our earlier tutorial, the hips were a very important parent joint to the entire skeleton. So basically, if you move the hips, you move the entire character. So I want this to be nice and big for my character here as well. So let's go ahead and continue moving up. I'm going to hide this character again. So that way I can take a couple of these, make them nice and big, and maybe a little bit more oval shaped. So that way they protrude out from our character, just like so. Going to scoot these up here as well. All right, almost done. I'm going to take this, rotate it 90 degrees. Actually, I should take all of these and rotate them 90 degrees. Whoops, wrong way. I guess it might be quicker for the sake of this demo just to, well, frankly, delete it and clone this guy over here. 1, 2, 3, there we go. Let's bring back our character just to see if these are big enough, which I can always scale these. I'm going to put one right here to this part of the hand, and then each of these are going to have their own controllers right here. So you can control each finger much like so. There we go. So now each joint that I've got has roughly its own controller on the hands. And then let's go ahead and finally make one for the neck. I'm going to scale these to the same. So let's do 10 by 10 by 10, just like that. Maybe I'll angle this guy a little bit to go along with the crook of it. And just to double check, make sure everything is kind of able to be grabbed onto. That's looking good to go. All right. So while we're here, and before I start mirroring these, because I want to mirror a couple of these controllers to the other side, right? So from the right arm to the left arm, from the right leg to the left leg, I do want to mirror those guys over. Before I do that, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go through and label all of these. So I'm going to say these are all controllers. So controller is going to be my prefix. This is going to be hips right there. I'm going to call this one, and basically what I'm going to be doing is kind of labeling these the same as I have done my character skeleton, joint skeleton, so that ways they will correspond very nice and easily to the correct joints. So this one is called spine 1, so I'm just going to go through here, relabel this spine 1. This joint right here is called spine 2, so we're going to call this spine 2. And this process gets rinsed and repeated for, as you can see, quite a while. So shoulder right, controller shoulder right. This is arm right. Oh, whoops, I labeled this wrong. My bad. There we go. This should be arm right. This should be elbow right. This should be wrist right. Let's see. This guy is knee right. This one is going to be called leg right. Perhaps the most tedious thing about rigging is going to be, well, this process right here of just making sure everything is labeled correctly. But labeling your rig is super duper important. There are standard nomenclature when it comes to rigs, especially if you want to use this rigs for things like animation sprites that you may have researched or found or has been used before. Or perhaps for mocap. Or if you're bringing this into a game engine like Unreal or Unity, you want to make sure that your rig is easily readable from all of these different types of programs. So there are different types of rigs that are out there. The one that we're kind of basing this tutorial on is a version of the Human IK rig that's read through like Maya and Unreal. So you just want to make sure that these guys are translating directly to those. So this is my, let's go ahead and expand this. This looks like it goes up from index 1, 2, and 3. So we're going to label this index 1 R. I'm going to copy that name so that way it's very quick for me to just go back here and say this is 2. This is 3. All right. This guy is going to be middle. Middle 1. Middle 2. Almost done, you guys. Middle 3. This one over here is going to be called ring 1. And notice I'm still having this suffix R for right behind all of these. That way, when I copy or when I mirror them, I can very easily change those to left. All right, almost done. This is going to be pinky 1R. Pinky 2R. And then finally, pinky 3R. All right. A couple of these that I do need to fix are going to be, or that I've skipped and perhaps should go back and find them. It's going to be this ankle one, NERP circle one. This is going to be our controller. We're just going to call this controller. And I want one on the ground. That way I can just very easily grab this big guy and slide the entire character around. So if I have this character walking, then I can just grab this, slide it over, with it being independent from like actually having to pose all of these joints to do what I want it to do. And then finally we've got, this is going to be thumb 1, followed by thumb 2, and then finally thumb 3. All right, I've got 2 more left. We're almost done. This is going to be neck, and then head. There we go. So now I've got all of my controllers labeled out, which is quite a lot. Okay, so now that we've got these, and I will mirror these guys around, but I do want to do that before I actually start binding these controllers to the individual joints. Something that might help me in narrowing this down is going to be parenting these controls. So in the very similar way that we were parenting the joints for our skeleton, we also want to parent these controllers so that ways they'll mimic or replicate the process in which these joints are going to move. So that process is exactly the same as before whenever we're parenting these joints. So first things first, let's go ahead and select all of our controllers, and I can just do that very easily in this outliner right here. I'm going to go to my polymodeling shelf just to find these quick icons. I want to delete the history and clear and freeze transformations. Because we did kind of mess with the scaling and the rotation and stuff like that, I want to get rid of all of that history and all of those transformations, so that way these are in their native positions and their native shapes. Now with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and parent these controllers up to each other to create a chain. So just like before, we're going to select the child, going to select the parent, work upstream, and hit P on our keyboard. And now these are both parented around, as you can see. So 1, 2, parent, 1, 2, parent. And this part will go by relatively quick. You just have to do it one at a time. So now this whole leg is parented. I'm going to skip these guys for now. Let's go ahead and navigate to our hands. These are probably going to take the longest just because there's the most of them. 1, 2, parent. 1, whoops, not that guy. 2, parent. Might be easier to kind of look up at this angle instead. 1, 2, parent, 1, 2, parent. And you'll notice that as we're parenting, our outliner is changing, and now we are having them kind of grouped into these sections, right? And so now we've got a tree that flows outward to it. And it's going to look very, very similar, if not identical, to how our skeletons are kind of organized. So from here, I'm going to parent all 4 of these fingers to the hand itself. So now if I grab the hand, that will move all 4 of these fingers. This thumb is actually going to be parented to the wrist. So if I move the wrist, the thumb will move. And this hand will also be parented to the wrist. So the wrist controls everything, especially the thumbs. This hand portion controls these 4 fingers. And then finally, we'll move that down the arms to the elbows. Now, this needs to be mirrored, so I'm going to leave that guy alone. Our head is going to be parented to the neck, which is going to be parented to, or I call it the neck. It's probably best to call it the shoulders. And then these guys are going to be, well, you know what? Actually, let me just put in, for the heck of it, 1 shoulder constraint right here. So this guy is going to control the shoulders. Delete history, freeze transformations. Let's call this controller shoulders. Now, usually there'll be a right and a left. I think it'll be fine for the sake of this demo to just have 1. It'll be okay. All right, where was I? Right, so parent the neck to the shoulders, parent the shoulders to the spine 2 goes to spine 1. And then finally, this big guy, I'm going to make it extra big. Delete history, freeze transformations. Whenever you have to modify the shapes, just go ahead and get rid of that history. And so now, this let's see. Whoops, there we go. Let's make that nice and big. Child to parent, P. Now my hips control all of this stuff. There we go. All right, so let's talk about mirroring these joints. in order to mirror them, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to duplicate this joint chain, or this controller chain, sorry, right here, onto the other joint, and then I'm going to reverse, or invert the scale of it. So let's talk about that real quick. With my snap to point tool selected still, I'm going to hold shift and clone this to where it snaps onto this other arm. And then I'm going to essentially invert the scale to line up, and I can come over here very precisely and type in -1 over there on my scale X, and now you can see it is mirrored. So we'll do the same thing over here. Just drag this guy over. In my scale X, I'm going to change that from 1 to -1, and now we've got essentially the same stuff over here. Now I do need to go through and change all of these R's to L's, because now this is going to be on the left side of our character. Just like that. Same thing goes for this arm. We're just going to call all of these, and I've got quite a bit of them, so this is going to take a little bit of time. Going to change all of these. Whoops. All of these R's, all of these rights to left. Once again, the most tedious part of rigging, making sure all of these names line up. There we go, and there we go. All right, that took a while, but now all of these have been renamed to represent the left arm and the left leg. And so now, finally, I can parent this guy. Oh, let's also take these here. Delete our history, freeze our transformations, because as you remember, we had moved them and changed their scale. So we do want to spam these two buttons very quickly before we move on to the next step. So the next step is going to be parenting these all into the one skeletal system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this shoulder joint, or sorry, this arm joint, and then this shoulder joint, and hit parent. And do the same thing on the left side too. So now, if I grab both of these, or if I just grab this shoulder joint, both arms move along with the shoulders, which is very nice. These leg joints are going to be parented to the hips. There we go. So now the hips move everything, as you can see, because remember, that's our main parent. And finally, I'm going to select the hips and my main controller down here and parent it to that very bottom one. So if I move this main controller, everything moves along with it. Very similarly to if I move the hips, but as you'll notice, the hips don't take that final controller down there. Everything else, however, works its way down the same hierarchy as our skeleton. So we're going to wrap up there for the sake of time. For episode 3, we are going to talk about how to combine all of these all of these controllers to our skeleton, so that way they will move together. So stay tuned for that. Of course, if you have any questions, do please let me know. I know this part is a little bit tedious because we do have to go through and make sure everything is named properly, but however, that is so important for the rigging process. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Again, if you have any questions, please holler and let me know. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.